On May 5, 1877, Crazy Horse and a group of his fellow warriors rode into the Red Cloud Agency near Fort Robinson, Nebraska. Weary from years of battling the colonizers' military across the Midwestern plains, they had come to surrender. Crazy Horse had become one of the most legendary warriors in Sioux history, but not even he could stop the westward push by the colonizers that resulted in thousands of his people either losing their lives or being forced onto reservations. But the story of Crazy Horse wouldn't end with his surrender. There was one more chapter left in the life of the mysterious and fearless warrior who put his life on the line in battle after battle in the wild fight for the West. Welcome back to Nutty History. Today, we're exploring the wild, controversial story of Crazy Horse, the Sioux warrior who took on the mighty U.S. government. Crazy Horse the warrior would paint his face with a yellow lightning bolt and conduct himself with modesty. His reputation as a skilled fighter grew during the late 1850s and early 1860s when he fought against traditional enemies of the Lakota, like the Crow, Shoshone, and Pawnee. But in 1864, he set his sights on the invading colonizer army. The 3rd Colorado Cavalry had just wiped out over 150 Cheyenne and Arapaho people, 2/3 of them non-combatants, in a village in southeastern Oklahoma Territory. In the aftermath, the Lakota decided to team up with the Cheyenne and the Arapaho to fight the white invaders across the Great Plains. Crazy Horse and Company began organizing raids along the Oregon Trail, taking out both soldiers and non-combatants alike, acquiring weapons, livestock, and other resources from the covered wagons rumbling westward. The commanding officer of Fort Laramie, the western post in Wyoming, didn't like all the raiding. Colonel Thomas Moonlight decided to fight back, but ended up being a pretty inept commander. He was accused of being drunk and letting a Native American raiding party steal most of his horses one night, forcing him and his men to walk back to Fort Laramie on foot, and on a few different occasions pursue the enemy in the opposite direction of where they actually were. Moonlight then decided to dangle in midair 2 Oglala Sioux men in front of Fort Laramie for everyone to see, where they stayed suspended in the air for months. Then he decided that the 1,500 or so Lakota and Arapaho living near the fort needed to be moved to Nebraska, to territory controlled by the Pawnee, fierce enemies of the Lakota and Arapaho. During their protest, the Native Americans and 140 U.S. soldiers accompanying them set off for Fort Kearney, 300 miles east in Nebraska. 2 days later, on June 13, 1865, a young Crazy Horse snuck into the traveling camp and convinced his people to fight back, and they overpowered the soldiers accompanying them and turned around, ending 4 colonizers in the process. Crazy Horse did his best to unite opposing Plains tribes against the colonizing army. Oftentimes, the Native American warriors were more focused on winning individual honors rather than collective victories, and one historian described their resistance efforts as being, quote, unable to turn a battle into a campaign. Still, they won a small victory shortly after the Battle of Platte Bridge, and another a year later in the Fetterman fight along the Bozeman Trail in Wyoming, where Crazy Horse and 9 of the warriors lured an unsuspecting enemy detachment into a fatal ambush that left 80 colonizer soldiers dead. 1866 brought with it the discovery of gold along the Bozeman Trail of the Black Hills region, and under the command of General William Tecumseh Sherman, fort after fort was popping up throughout Sioux territory. In 1876, Crazy Horse, with the help of Sitting Bull, another legendary figure of the Native American resistance to the invading army, had amassed a pretty sizable group of warriors in a camp of between 7,000 to 10,000 Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, along the banks of the Little Bighorn River in Montana, many of whom had fled the reservations they were being forced onto by their new government. It was this encampment that Colonel George Custer and his men made the mistake of attacking. The Battle of Little Bighorn, and Custer's last stand, went down as one of the worst defeats of the colonizer military during the series of battles with the Plains Indians. Crazy Horse was said to have led a flanking charge that ended up leading the demise of Custer and all of his men. During the battle, Crazy Horse was said to have moved dangerously close to the front lines, screaming wildly, and created a diversion for his men in what's called a brave run. Crazy Horse, or in the Lakota language, Tashunka Witko, which translates directly as "his horse is crazy," was born in the Black Hills of South Dakota sometime around 1840 to an Oglala Sioux father and a Miniconjou Sioux mother. He wasn't always named Crazy Horse, though. In Lakota Sioux tradition, boys were usually not named until they had some kind of important experience that earned them one. And that name could change again if another powerful enough experience warranted it. So, for a good part of his childhood, Crazy Horse was called Curly. He had curly hair and a lighter complexion than most Lakota Sioux, and his unusual looks made him feel like an outsider amongst his own people. He was described as being aloof and quiet as a kid, and as we'll see, often played by his own rules, and split with Lakota traditions in many ways. There are varying accounts of how Curly ended up becoming Crazy Horse. We do know that his father was also named Crazy Horse. One version of the story goes that as a teenager, Curly was out hunting one day when he saw a Shoshone warrior attacking a Lakota woman. He took out the warrior with his club and then fled to the hills to evade the rest of the Shoshone raiding party, where he hid until nightfall. When Curly made it home, his father was so proud that he gave up his own name to his son and took a new name, Waglula, which means worm. Not sure what would compel someone to give themselves a name that seems more fitting for the gross sidekick of some evil character in a movie, but hey, worms, well, they're good for the soil. Another version relates how Crazy Horse got his name after a particularly intense vision quest in the Black Hills. His quest was spurred by the violence he saw in his village while he was still a teenager. Violence that directly led to over 30 years of fighting between Plains tribes and the colonizers' army. Crazy Horse, or Curly as he was probably still called then, had witnessed the death of the village chief, Conquering Bear, in what became known as the Grattan Fight of 1854. After the event, Crazy Horse/Curly started getting trance-type visions. Vision quests were important rites of passage in many Native American cultures, including the Lakota Sioux. Curly didn't go through many of the traditional preparations before his quest. He just up and wandered out into the Black Hills. Out in the hills, he had a vision of a warrior on horseback who appeared from a lake, he and his horse dancing and floating in the air. A thunderstorm billowed up above the warrior, and a bolt of lightning struck him in the face, leaving him with a lightning bolt scar on his face like a more rad Harry Potter. The warrior told him that if he dressed modestly, didn't touch any of his tribesmen, and didn't scalp his enemies, then he would be untouched in battle and would become a great protector of his people. A red-tailed hawk screeched and soared off in the distance at the end of the vision, seemingly confirming the prophecy. Later, Black Elk, Crazy Horse's cousin, would relate what he knew about Crazy Horse's vision to the American historian John G. Neihardt in an interview/book, Black Elk Speaks, one of the most illuminating texts about Lakota Sioux culture. Crazy Horse dreamed and went into the world where there is nothing but the spirits of all things. That is the real world that is behind this one, and everything we see here is something like a shadow from that world. He was on his horse in that world, and the horse and himself on it, and the trees and the grass and the stones, and everything were made of spirit, and nothing was hard, and everything seemed to float. His horse was standing still there, and yet it danced around like a horse made only of shadows, and that is how he got his name. It was a short-lived victory for Crazy Horse and his people, though. The new government cracked down and cracked down hard. By May of 1877, Crazy Horse had surrendered to the U.S. at Red Cloud Agency near Fort Robinson in Nebraska. He lived in a village nearby for a couple of months, during which time he was celebrated in what has become known as the Last Sundance of 1877. By September, a couple of Lakota chiefs had become jealous at the preferential treatment Crazy Horse was being given by the colonizer army at the Red Cloud Agency. The two chiefs, Spotted Tail and Red Cloud, the Lakota leader after whom the agency was named, had come to accept certain white ways and ate with forks. Crazy Horse started to as well. He wanted peace, and to him it seemed that adopting the ways of the enemy was the best way to ensure it. Rumors, perhaps started by Red Cloud and Spotted Tail, began to spread that Crazy Horse wanted to flee and return to his roots. To test his loyalty, the colonizer army asked him to join their fight against the Nez Perce, a tribe that was causing trouble up in Montana. At first, Crazy Horse declined, but when he eventually agreed, his words were mistranslated. His statement that he would fight, quote, until all the Nez Perce were eliminated somehow turned into, quote, he would go north and fight till not a white man was left. The clumsy, obviously intentional mistranslation landed him in jail. A day later, while being escorted by guards at Fort Robinson where he had voluntarily turned himself in, he was mortally wounded in the back with a bayonet by one of the guards. It was never revealed which guard it was. Crazy Horse was buried by his parents somewhere near Wounded Knee, South Dakota, though the exact location remains unknown to this day. Like much of his life, this great Sioux warrior's final resting place has faded into mystery and legend. Who was your favorite Native American warrior? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more nutty history.